discrimination, and environmental justice. So the members that are up here on the panel today, they represent different areas of our state. They have different perspectives and vantage points from where they come from. But if you start putting inner city, meatpacking, supply chain, indigenous, and rural people all together in a room, and we start to learn from one another and discuss about these kind of issues, all together, we represent a very, very large and powerful bloc in the state of Nebraska. It's important that we have these discussions, because I think what you'll find today, after listening to our panelists, is that no matter where we are, the majority of us in the state have a lot in common. We're facing a lot of the same things, just in different ways. But if you track and dig deeper, if you peel off that first layer, you find out it's kind of the same pattern. And only through these discussions can we get to the bottom of starting to create solutions that address these patterns. So my hopes with this discussion today are that by the end of this conversation, we'll better understand more about more Nebraska communities who are facing these predatory pressures in different ways that threaten the highest quality of life that every Nebraskan deserves, and in many cases, basic human rights. It is only by better understanding one another's challenges that we'll be able to work as a larger collective unit to enable more thoughtful, compassionate, and a more organized movement that will allow us to overcome our greatest challenges that seem like they're mounting up, but can be overcome if we continue dialogue under this fashion. So, you'll notice at the end of the table, Jane is not here yet, and I will tell you why that is. It's because she is from the country like me, and sometimes when we let country folk into the city, we get lost. So she is on her way, even though she came from Denton, Nebraska, which is west of Lincoln, from North Omaha, where she ended up on this drive. Luckily, it's a beautiful day for a drive. But you may see her coming in the edge here in a little bit. So she's planning on joining us, and as soon as she gets here, she is en route. So now we're going to move into intros. We're going to do self-introductions. My name is Graham Christensen. I'm a fifth-generation farmer. Our farm is transitioning to regenerative agriculture. 1867 was the year that we started farming. Omaha Wahite is the term of the creek that runs through and meanders through our farm. We have known it as Bell Creek during our life, but that is my acknowledgement of what was before, and that is a reminder to myself how sacred that this land is and how I must care for this land for the next generations to come after me. I'm also an entrepreneur. I have started 2 small businesses. One is GC Resolve. We are working on normalizing the environmental conversation because it fits in all of our cultures across the state, and it's time that we talk that way. We're working on bridge building these conversations, just like today. We have a focus on regenerative ag and regenerate Nebraska network. We have a focus on water quality, all things environment, and equity is a part of the things that we work on. Also have another small business that develops solar energy systems and helps lay out from time to time a bigger platform for alternative energy systems outside the country. And if you want to talk about a bridge building conversation, that's definitely a bridge building conversation, trying to get wind turbines in the country these days. So now, with no further ado, I'm going to self-introduce, have self-introductions, the speakers on this panel, and then we will dive into our questions. Cheryl?
Morning, sir.
Morning.
Oliver Jones. I work with the Lead Safe Omaha Coalition. Sir, my purpose for calling you this morning is to see if we could take some soil samples out of your yard, test it, and see if it comes back with high levels of lead. We're doing this in the area. It's totally, absolutely free. What will happen is we will take some soil samples, we will give you the results, and the EPA will get the results. So all I need to get this started, sir, is you give me your signature right here. And again, like I told you, it's absolutely free. So if you sign right here, we'll be able to get started on that.
I think I will.
All right. All right, thank you, sir. I've got some information I'd like to leave with you. This has information about exactly what we're doing in your neighborhood. As you'll see on the back, we've got some information numbers. If you have any questions, you can give them a call, sir.
Okay,
Thank you very much for your time.
I signed today to have my property sampled, not only because it is the law under the EPA Superfund authority, but because it is the right thing to do. Sign up. Know if your yard is lead safe. It's free.
Thank you, Graham, and I would like to say, to tell Jane, don't feel bad. You don't have to be in the country to get lost over here on the UNO parking lots. And I almost didn't make it because when they told me you need to go over to E, and I'm seeing the building from out there, and I'm like, I'm not walking way over there. So I understand Jane fully and getting into here, so don't feel bad. Country doesn't have anything to do with it. My name is Cheryl Weston, and I want to thank Inclusive Communities and Graham and Nikki and all of you for inviting me to be on this panel. You may, afterwards, Graham, you may say, I should not have done that. But I thank you anyway for inviting me here and be able to give my background, being involved with the community in environmental, but basically just community all the way around. I am a North Omaha, long-time resident, don't plan to leave it. To the good master calls, and I hope that's a long time away. But I've always been involved because I think it is so important that people become involved in what's happening in the community. And being in North Omaha, and coming up from North Omaha, I went to Central High School, graduated, one of the first of my family to go to college and get a degree, and I thought about continuing on with that, but I had had enough. I got the bachelor's. And I always like to tell the story why I went to college, because I didn't do it right out of high school. I had to have a few knocks to go around. But I was working for a bank, and I was was one of the first. I called it the token, but they said I was female. I was token black, and I was right on the front, down in the main part of the building. And so I was supposed to be just the receptionist and that, and I started having to fill in like on the days that somebody didn't show up in the personal banking area. And next thing I know, I am training all of the young, smart, but college graduates coming in. I'm training them. But I could not receive the title. So I went to them and said, like, hey, I'm training these people. And you want me to be out here in front so you can show you have a black, and you don't want to give me the title, but you're willing to give me the money. And I'm like, nope, I have trained your last little young know-it-all from right out of college. I trained your last one. I'm done. And that determined, and my grandmother, who had lived with us almost all of my life, had a 6th grade education. She had to drop out of school because she had to help take care of the family. But she taught herself to read. And she taught herself through the paper. And I said, you know what? If she's got that determination, and she would always install on us kids, you can do anything you want to do. You can be anybody you want to be. So that's where I started from, Donald Creek, got married, did that whole thing, and just became, because the community, North Omaha, is always at the bottom. We get what's left. We get money that comes into this city of Omaha that is designated for those census tracts, for those individuals, the product, and then guess what? We get the trickle down, and then you get out to the big part of the city. That's where. We get the environmental racism because it's segregated and it's redlined.
The following exhibit factually presents the character and scope of systemic and perpetual racism in Omaha, Nebraska. As intentionally engineered by politically powerful and affluent white people, but not all white people, throughout the 1900s until the early 1970s, redlining legally established the physical separation of people of color from all white-owned and white-controlled properties in Metro Omaha, including neighborhoods, businesses, churches, and public schools. As indicated in the graphic at far right, labeled East, minorities were legally restricted to these areas, and also located in these red-line areas were factories that produced or used lead and energy-producing facilities for the production and distribution of coal. Despite increasing scientific knowledge on the health risks of lead and coal, nevertheless, minorities were prohibited from moving elsewhere in Metro Omaha, and the health impact on low-income white people was also ignored. In addition to health impairment from coal and lead, red-line areas also had the least access to healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, dentists, etc., and healthcare facilities, hospitals, and clinics. Health disparities endured by minorities in Metro Omaha have never been eliminated. In addition to the fact lead and coal impairs the learning ability of children, red-line areas also had the worst schools, the worst teachers, and the worst access to educational materials. As white citizens increasingly moved west to populate suburban areas, new and legally independent school districts were created. Ralston, Papillion, La Vista, Millard, and Elkhorn, that either legally prohibited or strongly discouraged access of minority students, and with or without mandatory busing of minority students. Today, Omaha schools are as segregated now as they were in 1968. Red-line areas prohibited or strongly discouraged the creation of new jobs and industries, and prohibited or strongly limited access of minorities to banking, lending, and financial services, which resulted in and continues to sustain high unemployment in red-line areas in North and South Omaha. Criminal activity in some redline areas increased due to the prohibition of minorities to pursue legal business development and employment opportunities.
So where do you have anything that's environmental bad? Not good, bad. Where do you have the soil problems? Where do you have the coal problems, coal power? Where do you have any of that? North Omaha and South Omaha. Because that's where the impoverished people are. That's where the minorities are. That's where the lower class, as some call it, but many of us have more class than they will ever have in their total. So I was asked to come and speak on those, and that's what I'm going to speak on, the area that I am familiar with in considering environmental racism. And as I said, Graham wanted to try to be good, and so that you will invite me back. So I've given you my little background, so I'm going to pass it on to you, and you can go ahead and...
Thank you. I just want to build up on what has been said in expressing gratitude for being invited here today, and expressing gratitude to everyone for being here today and being in conversation. Just honored to be here. I really want to express gratitude for starting the conversation by recognizing, those that lived here and continue to live here, especially the Omaha Nation, since the city of Omaha is on Omaha territory. My name is Luis Marcos. I belong to the Hanobal Maya people. And our territory, the Maya territory, extends from the south part of Mexico, the entire state of Guatemala and Belize, and the northwestern portions of El Salvador and Honduras. Those are all colonial states on Maya territory. And so I belong to the Hanobal Maya, and so my traditional homeland is divided by the borders of Guatemala, the northwestern portion of Guatemala, and also Mexico. So that's where I come from. Since colonial era, we have suffered many cycles of violence, but one that really reached the attention of the international community took place between 1960 and 1996. As a result of that, cycle of violence, genocide, we think that there are about 1 million people of Maya, more than that, close to 2 million people of Maya origin across the United States, about 10,000-15,000 here in the state of Nebraska alone, and about 3,000-4,000 in the city of Omaha. So we articulate our presence as a displaced indigenous people, or a displaced indigenous nation. And when you use the word people or nation in international law, the right to self-determination and self-government applies. And so I'm honored to be a spiritual and political authority within the Hanobal Maya government. I am the ambassador of the Hanobal Maya government to the Omaha tribe of Nebraska here. And so I am really just eager to continue sharing, and thank you for so eloquently describing the topic for tonight or this afternoon, environmental racism.
Romulo, would you be able to go next?
Definitely, thank you, and good evening, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. My name is Romulo Vega, and I go by RJ for short, he, him pronouns. I am a community organizer for Nebraska Appleseed. Nebraska Appleseed is a nonprofit. We do statewide work where we work for opportunity and justice for all Nebraskans. Now, it's an honor to be in community, even though it's virtually here with everybody. I had a family emergency that had to take me to South Central Nebraska. Otherwise, I had full intentions to be there with you all. But this is such an important discussion that we're going to have. And in particular, I'm not someone who has a deep layer ability to talk about strictly environmental issues. However, as somebody who's a community organizer, my job is to earn the trust and the good faith of community members, and also acknowledge the impacts that some of these decisions and actions that have been taken place has had on different Nebraska community members, from the farmer ranchers who are multi-generational to the immigrant meat packing plant worker. On a personal level, I am the son of a dad who did work in meat packing plants, sharpening knives in the Lexington, Grand Island, Gibbon, Nebraska areas, as well as the son of a mom who was a migrant farm worker. She and her family would follow the work from Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, Nebraska, picking everything from watermelons, tomatoes, potatoes, cotton, anything just to ultimately provide for the family. And my parents settled in central Nebraska, and that's where I was born. So I'm somebody here who's excited to listen and learn, but also to share some of the learnings I have had in talking with community members and really identifying some of the intersections that come up when we talk about environmental racism, environmental justice, and again, how some of these decisions, whether it be greed or exploitation or oppression, a variety of things we'll touch upon, how that has impacted the human beings, the human beings that we call our neighbors, our friends, and our loved ones. So thank you all very much for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you. So I'm just going to say a little bit about Jane, because I have had the great fortune to work with her. I've also been able to work closely with Luis Marcos here on the panel, and RJ as well. This is my first working experience with Cheryl, but I will reassure you that I did reach out and did some investigative work on Cheryl to make sure that she's solid, and I got nothing but reaffirming suggestions that she's the one that needs to be here. She'd be a great representative of the North Omaha community. And by the way, Cheryl, just remember what you say today. You invited me onto your show in a little bit. So payback can be a you-know-what. But what we have to do now, in all seriousness, is we have to confront the issues. We can only reach solutions if we confront those issues. And so Cheryl is in the right mind in coming up here, and so are the other panelists as well. The first question that I want to offer to the group is, and actually just let me step back for a second. I did want to mention a little bit about Jane before I get excited and get to confronting the issues. Jane has lived a rural life. She's been around Nebraska a large part of her life. She grew up on a farm. Her parents were entrepreneurs that helped develop agricultural-based equipment. She's been involved politically and as an activist in several different arenas, but the activism on behalf of her community, which ended up being called the Lancaster Hills Alliance, stood up as they started getting more intrusion from those mega Costco poultry barns that came into the rural areas all upstream from Omaha and Lincoln, 500 of them approximately, about 22 million new chickens, all with litter going into the water that goes downstream. Jane was a great leader during this effort. They fought hard to stop the barns in their community. They didn't necessarily get that stopped. But it did yield, which she'll talk about more, a whole new slate of zoning suggestions in Lancaster County, which has protected the city of Lincoln and the surrounding communities to this day and moving forward, and set the stage for one of the barns, a series of barns not being improved that would have been built next to the Raymond Central School. So I have great admiration for Jane as well, and the folks over in that part of the region who have stood up for the good of the cause as well. All right, now we can confront the issues. So my first question that I want to pass on ask is, what does environmental racism or discrimination mean to each one of you respectively? And this time, I am going to say, Luis, would you like to start?
Yeah, okay, good. Well, first, I think Cheryl really gave a beautiful definition of what it means, and then I think we're on the same page there. I guess it's really important for me to define how we see the world as the Maya nation, and then I'll probably give an example of environmental racism. The essence of our worldview and our spirituality as the Maya nation is that we're here to live in harmony and equilibrium, not only with Mother Earth, first with humanity, right? With this understanding that when we're a human family, we have different languages, different cultures, different faith traditions, different political systems, different systems of social organization. With all of that, we understand that we're here to live in harmony and equilibrium. That we're not here to convert anyone to how we think, but we're here to meet with people where they are. And from that understanding of respect, we establish relationships. We're also here to live in harmony with Mother Earth and all forms of life, so that our lives as a human being is not above or below any form of life, but we're just one element of that thing that we call life. And the universe, right? And so that is that's the philosophical understanding of our ancestors. And so to us then, Earth is our mother, not a resource, but our mother. And so we have this mother-son, mother-daughter, child-children relationship with Earth. And so what does environmental racism mean to me or to us as a nation? Yeah, we could go on and on, right? But I won't do that tonight. Maybe just one example, in the same way that Cheryl gave us an example. An example of environmental racism to me right now, what we're facing, you know how I started in talking about these cycles of violence since the invasion, the European invasion into this continent. We have suffered multiple cycles of violence. One that I described took place between 1960 and 1996. After that, genocidal attempts didn't stop there. It only changed form. The genocide continues. So one of these forms right now is transnational corporations are coming into Maya territory without our free, prior, and informed consent, as enshrined in international law, which includes the Convention 169 of the International Labor Organization, ILO 169. It clearly states that if you want a project on indigenous territories, it has to be, you have to provide free, prior, and informed consent. You have to get that, show the people all the environmental studies, environmental impact before you can get in. But they are doing that without our free, prior, and informed consent. These hydroelectric corporations come in and produce electricity, and so it's sold into bigger cities like cities of Guatemala or Mexico or wherever it is imported. The community where this electricity is produced don't have electricity. They don't enjoy any of the benefits of what is produced. And this is true about gold mining, about any kind of, mining. So that to me is environmental racism. We pay for the consequences of all of these extractive activities, like when they go into and dig gold, for example, the contamination of water, deforestation, and all of these, the destruction of our sacred sites, for example, we suffer the consequences of all of that. Displacement of entire indigenous, communities to come into urban areas. So that to me is environmental racism, and I really want to learn more from others, so I better just stop it here, right?
Thank you. I was learning a lot from you, and being here, we have also suffered some of the same problems, not too so much as the genocide and that thing, but they've come into our home, our area, our community, and have made the decisions for us. They have reaped the benefits, but we suffer the consequences. In North Omaha or any area where you have, usually it's black and brown people or people of lower economic status. And why are they economic status lower? Is because that's the way they make it. They have redlined our area. They have decided this is where this is going to be done, and so forth. I looked up what environmental racism is, or what it's defined as, if you were to Google it, because everybody Googles everything. And according to Wikipedia, environmental racism is an ecological apartheid. It's a form of institutional racism leading to landfills, incinerators, and hazardous waste disposals being disproportionately placed in communities of color or poor. According to the professor at Honors College, Mariah Gomez, she defined environmental racism as any policy, practice, or derivative that affects the disadvantaged individuals, groups, or communities, whether it be intended or unintended. And I looked at it and I thought, you know what? That kind of sums it up in a nice way. But I too believe that environmental racism is alive, and unfortunately, it's becoming stronger. And two examples of environmental racism in Omaha, Nebraska, the North Omaha coal power plant, and declared by the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, in 1999, Omaha, Nebraska was the largest lead Superfund site. And I don't mind taking credit for it. I was very instrumental in that fight to have this as a Superfund site. Because our children, I don't know how much you know about lead, but lead in a child's body when they're growing up, particularly that age up to 6, it destroys the brain cells. And those brain cells, they're not going to be rejuvenated. Once they're gone, they're gone. Why was our children having so many problems because of lead? Why wasn't it the children that are farther west, farther southwest? Why wasn't? No, it's because our children, our parents, they weren't able to be able to get to that other side. And those that had the funding to be able to move farther, to get away from the incinerators, the hazardous waste, they were pushed back because of redlining. That environmental, that's racism. Racism at its highest. That's economic racism. And all of that economic, all of the waste, the generators, all of that, that's racism. And that makes it be part of the environmental. The environmental comes from being the part that it's something that's soil, something that's hazardous. Those are. And here's what I'd like to say. I found this very interesting because I did some, like I said, research. I like to know what I'm talking about, or at least think I know what I'm talking about. And February 27th, I looked up, and dig this. This is the Wire West Side High School. February 27th, 2023. Omaha has a long history of segregation, and that legacy has carried on to the impact of the environment in neighbors historically of color. The University of California, Berkeley rated Omaha as a highly segregated city, and the NAACP deems it, Omaha, as the 16th most environmentally unjust city in the country. Omaha's prime example of environmental racism is in North Omaha Coal Power Plant that provides a number of health effects to a neighborhood of color or lower socioeconomic. According to GRIST, a nonprofit providing climate justice solutions, said in Omaha, asthma rates 20%, almost 3 times higher than any other place in Nebraska. So, this is what it's about. This is environmental racism. That's what it is to me, and that's what it is to, evidently, a lot of other people. And here you have high schoolers at West Side, they figured it out, but we got the so-called elite, they can't figure it out. So one of the things, and we'll get into, is one of Graham's further down the road here questions, or comments that he'd like for us to address, is how do we address those problems? What are solutions? And that's what I believe you're here for today, is to talk about what are those solutions. I wanted to say that back in 1998, it actually started in 1997 with a letter to the EPA requesting them to come in and check out the city. And it was cost a Sarco and Union Pacific had been having, I think it was 2,700, I want to say, acres there. They had been putting this stuff into the ground and then in from the smoke signals. And they had a man that came forth. He said his job at night down at the Circle plant, when everybody's sleeping, was to open up those steps to let everything go out. And we all know that if it goes out, up, it's got to come back down. And where was that wind blowing into? North Omaha. And that's when it started, was the EPA came in. Now, they weren't expecting the fight that they got, but it was because people in the community stepped forth and said, hey, it's our kids. It's our kids. This is what's happening to our kids. You want to blame our kids for their bad behavior. You want to put our kids on medication because you say they're in school, they're misbehaving, they're not. Why? Why are our kids behind with speech problems? And you know what? They started investigating and they found out, oh, wait a minute, not only is it here in North Omaha, but it's starting to move towards mid. Oh no, we can't have that. Can't have that. That's happening. It takes people like you to become involved, to have these conversations, to take and say, this has to stop, and it has to stop now. And when I looked at it and I went through some of my files and I said, that's 25 years. And guess what? The EPA and HUD just gave the city of Omaha $34.5 million to correct something that's been going on for the past 25 years. And beforehand, that should have been designated as the largest Superfund site at that time, and now you're still treating it. And I don't know if this is the point, but can I go further on that? Is that one of the things that I hope that people, when you hear this $34.5 million is going to the city of Omaha. What needs to happen? When we started that fight back in 1999 and we got the EPA to come in, they were able to win the award from the Union Pacific and stuff. You know what I was fighting for? Is to say that the individuals who are most affected, they should be the ones that get the jobs. They should be the contractors that get the jobs. Instead, right now the city, they're having this $34.5 million to do this with. We need to be on the alert, and we need your help. Because I'm going to start fighting and saying, who's going to clean up those yards? Who's going to do the work in those homes? Who's doing that? Why isn't it the people from the community that is being harmed by this? Why aren't they given the jobs? Why aren't those contractors? The EPA just had a class that said, we'll train. Train. So when I see that, I'm going to there and I want to see, who do I see in that training? Who do I see? I'm going to start holding up. I need your help. We have to go to the city of Omaha and say, hey, we're not going to have our eyes closed. The people that are most affected, those are the people who should benefit from this.
RJ, take it away.
Thank you, Graham. No, those were excellent definitions and examples to this very issue, and I would just say exactly that. It's that cause and effect, the decisions made and the results that have come from that, and more specifically the communities that have been impacted in largely negative ways through some of these decisions made by a powerful few that have impacted so many community members who don't have that access to power and control as some of these larger and more powerful entities do. Now, a couple examples that I want to uplift, and I know, Luis, you were alluding to this, and I want to expand upon that. You know, when we talk about environmental racism, okay, we're talking about communities and more specifically areas of land, la madre tierra, you know, the mother earth, that have a certain resource or have certain resources that those with power and wealth and ability to extract do target, and then they draw from that, right? And the goal there is to, from their perspective, grow and make profits, right? And continue expanding. But we also need to acknowledge that the people who have long been there and the people who are here in Nebraska, there has been a systematic depowering of community members, and the balance beam has shifted to that small minority that does control the power and the wealth. One example that's close to me is meat processing plants. I mean, we've known since, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle is 1906, so late 1800s, 1900s, that it's a tough line of work, the meat processing facilities, right? We've known that. That's not news to anybody here. I've heard stories from elders in the community, folks who, for example, may be of German background, Czech background, whatever the case. They'd say, "Oh yeah, my dad was a meat packer. He was a union man, had great benefits, and could provide for the family, and that's great." Now that's largely not the case, and the question becomes, what kind of workforce is needed to work in a highly physical and stressful environment? Well, then it largely falls upon immigrant community members. Well, when we look at the factors that have forced migration to the United States, to the heartland, Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, we have to acknowledge that the environment is one thing. Small family farms, whether it be in Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, wherever, villages, ranchos, it's getting, it's getting to the point where it's forced. You have to seek out, that ability to generate a living and send money back to families because of whether it be environmental decisions and extractions that were made, whether it be foreign policy decisions that have destabilized, in some cases, democratically elected leadership, causing instability, and right for corruption and other authoritarian factors that does lead to folks having to leave the only life they've known, their loved ones, their family members, their grandparents, their brothers and sisters, in some cases their own children. Leave it all with no guarantee that you will ever see those loved ones again, and have to travel a dangerous path through Latin America, through Mexico, and no guarantee you'll be able to even get into the United States. And once you're here, work in an industry that has systematically devoiced and depowered workers. Okay? So this isn't something that happened overnight. This is something that has been cultivated in a way. Going back to the original question about environmental racism, it's these human beings who are placed in a situation where, it's not a lot of options as much as you got to work, you're here, you got to send the money back home, or you got to feed your family here, whatever the case may be. And there are decisions that have been made here that really are tough and harmful, and we need to look at that. Harmful to the worker. We see from the farmers and ranchers that they have been harmed too. I mean, when we talk about small family farms, that's something that's been disappearing, it feels like, in favor of these larger corporate farming entities. When we talk about pricing and monopolies, for the animals they're raising, that's a big factor. When we talk about the impact that has on rural communities, an aging population, where people leave the small towns here in Nebraska to maybe go to Lincoln or Omaha, or maybe leave Nebraska, and that's a drain on the talent that we have here. So, long story short, and I'll wrap things up with this thought, is that the balance beam has been tilted in a way, and we need to tilt it back. And alluding to some of the points from the other panelists, it does start with our communities. We'll dive deeper into this here in a few moments. But right now, community members, workers, we really have our backs against the wall, and we really need to move things in a way that will give us a larger voice and a larger share of the power to create a more equitable distribution of the decision making.
I appreciate this, RJ. Now, just want to go into the break with a rural perspective since Jane's not here yet. Over my life of 43, the farms have gotten bigger, less young people come back. And it's just simple things like less people to hang out with, that are your age, like less potential for significant others, things such as just these basic things that we take for granted. But what I really have noticed is that my friends who were considered small farms, maybe just a parcel of land back in the day, they worked in the meat packing plants. And they lived really great middle-class jobs, lives with benefits, and put their kids into college. And then NAFTA hit. And as a young person on the farm, I saw the Mexicans immigrate to the north and start working on the farm. I saw the Mexican communities and eventually the Central American communities come into those meat packing plants where they stripped away the benefits and they decreased the wages. In 1979 at Hormel meatpacking plant in Fremont, Nebraska, the year I was born, wages were at $13 an hour. Just fast forward to 2016-17, where Costco, this new innovative big system, started wages at $13 an hour for the meatpacking plant. And after we made noise about that, they went up to $15 for the starting wage. To RJ's point, we are creating jobs that are developing lower class systems which put more pressures in our lives, which cause us to react in different ways to protect our families, our communities, etc. This is not the way forward. When we get done with the break in about 15 minutes, we'll come back and talk about those ways forward. So stay with us. Jane has joined us. I already filled in some of the background from the challenges that she's been dealing with, but she is ready to tackle solutions. So go ahead, Jane.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for filling in for me while I was driving around lost in the beautiful city of Omaha. Solutions. I guess first I'd like to talk a little bit about what our group, the Lancaster Hills Alliance, has accomplished. I don't know if that was talked about while I was lost, but one of the things that we did to hold back the impact of CAPOs, confined animal feeding operations in Lancaster County, was to create new regulations. They were basically non-existent. We had never been faced with having a CAPO in our county before, and really had to start from scratch. And we did so. And they're very strict, and they were put into law, which we're very pleased. Just citizens collaborated to do that. And there have been no CAFO permits applied for or approved since those regulations went into force, so we're very proud of that. The other thing is our group of associates, we beat back Legislative Bill 662. That is the Right to Farm Act in Nebraska, and there is a piece of that bill that allowed citizens to sue or to file nuisance lawsuits against bad actors operating CAFOs. And we were there in 2019 when they wanted to change the time limit from 4 to 2 years. And we fought them on that, but then we finally came to an agreement and said, all right, 2 years. So if you are in a rural area, or I guess basically a rural area, and your neighbor is a CAFO, and you suddenly find that your well has gone dry, or that you have odors coming from chicken barns or any kind of animal feeding operation, if bees are dying, if you have some physical evidence of some problems being caused by those CAFOs, you have the right to bring a lawsuit against them to make them correct it. This bill this year that was brought forward, they tried to reduce the time from 4 to 2 years. Now, when pollution occurs from one of these CAFOs, sometimes it takes years for it to show up in the environment. And so we said, no, 2 years is still, that's still a pretty tough, restrictive time limit to allow suits. They were also wanting to allow only certain people within certain distances of CAFOs to file a lawsuit. And they made that very strict, and we beat that back as well. So we went before the Agricultural Committee on Valentine's Day, actually, and there were over 15 of us that showed up, and we ragged at them for 2.5 hours that day. And then we found out from Senator Halloran, who is the chair of that Ag Committee, that 24 people had sent in emails in opposition to this amendment to the law. So I think that at least for this year, it's dead. I'm sure it's going to come back in some other form again. They're going to keep trying to get it into law, but we're going to be right there and to continue to fight it back. It's a big picture, some of the solutions. Some of them have already been suggested. Some others, besides educating ourselves in forums like this, would be to run for elected office. Run for your local NRD or for your county commission, or county supervisors. Try to impact policy directly. It's pretty easy, actually. I know that, it's just common everyday citizens that do it. Those are the people that are holding those offices. They're not any different from any of us here in this room. You can write opinions to local newspapers. You can post on social media, of course. You can join nonprofit organizations like the Sierra Club or a national one like the Waterkeepers Alliance. If you go to greendreamer.com, you'll find a list of 35 environmental groups that are tackling all kinds of environmental issues, and just select one. The other thing, I think we talked, I'm not sure because I wasn't here, but I was hoping that we talked quite a bit about water quality and quantity in the rural areas, and of course in the urban areas as well. We have to remember that when CAFOs come in force in Nebraska, all that water runs down from the rural areas and affects urban dwellers as well. So we have to collaborate, rural and urban, to try and mitigate the problems that are caused by others that are polluting the environment. Graham has a citizen water test program, and do we have the test kits here, Graham, or do we order them?
Nikki is going to pass around an email at the end that's going to have some resources for you to check out. There will be an ability, there will be a link that will connect you to to the University of Nebraska Department of Civil Engineering water testing, so you can get a test that tests for nitrates for free to see what your nitrate levels are. Now, you just enroll in this simple application form. This is essentially a packet, and I do have some extras if anyone wants to take any to go tonight. But you'll be able to get on that, order your water testing kit, see if your water is high in nitrates. It is more geared for streams, ponds, lakes, or wells. Not as much for the city of Omaha, but it doesn't hurt to experiment around and keep track of what's going on in the water around here. So, long story short, we have a couple ways to get your water testing kits for anybody who's following along here.
So that's a real simple action item that you can participate in if you'd like to. So anyway, I'm sorry that I missed most of it. I'll try and do better next time. I'll have someone else drive me to Omaha. So anyway, it's a pleasure to be here tonight, so thank you for inviting me.
Cheryl, you're our closer tonight.
All right. Don't mind closing. And I think I want to just say, saying you hit on a good point, it is what can happen in rural will come down and be in the urban. And then, as you mentioned just randomly, you said, well, it doesn't hurt to test the water in the urban areas, because again, as I've said, the two environmental racism things that I'm addressing right now is the soil cleanups and the lead in the child, and then also the North Omaha power plant, coal plant. And that has been going on for years, and one of the things that we are doing, when I say we as a community, is form the ad hoc North Omaha power plant committee. And it's just people who've come together because we realize what this coal plant is doing. In 2014, a group was to form a community, everything, and they thought that they had it resolved because it was said 2023 the coal plant would no longer be active. But guess what? It's still active. And now what we're being told is maybe 2026. So what is that solutions that we need to be? Is one thing, as you said, we've got to come together and be as this community. And then we have to hold, I think, we have to hold their feet to the fire. We need to be having a timeline given to us as to, okay, here's the steps, this is where we plan to be, whatever has to be done to get the coal plant shut down. This is what's going to happen in 2024, 2025, so that 2026. Because, I go back to the young people. They were able to see it. In affecting the air quality, the North Omaha coal power plant puts the water quality of the Missouri River at risk, because it dumps the majority of the coal ashes from the plant into the Missouri River. And then the other thing that they said, hey, 10 years, shouldn't it have certainly been enough time to anticipate the closing of the plant in 2023 and realize what needs to happen? to get Omaha's power switched. That's important why we, as this ad hoc committee, needs to continue to work with OPPD, is don't settle back and say, okay, we've got their word on this, it's going to happen. No, we have got to be in communication, educating the community, making things happen, and I strongly believe that we do need to have this timeline as to say, this is where we plan, OPPD, this is where we're going to be come 2024, 2025, and 2026. This is what we're going to do.